You're watching Midnight Creed, where every story hides a deep secret and an unexpected twist that will keep you on edge. If you love suspense, mysterious and thrilling tales, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Welcome to Midnight Creed. Let's start the story.
Chapter 1. The frame left hanging in the dark. The Grand Museum of Halvern stood like a cathedral of austere beauty at the heart of the city, its stone facade illuminated by soft amber lamps. Its broad arches and towering pillars, suggestive of a place built not merely to house art, but to worship it. Tonight, however, an unsettling stillness clung to its exterior. Despite the banners announcing the long-awaited Renaissance exhibition, despite the expectation that tomorrow's opening would bring dignitaries, benefactors, and critics from across Europe, the museum seemed subdued, as if some invisible hand had drawn a pall of unease across its venerable walls. Inside, beyond the echoing marble foyer and the velvet ropes arranged for the morning ceremony, the East Gallery lay in darkness. Only the emergency sconces glowed faintly, bathing the corridor in a diluted blue haze. Their weak illumination stretched across polished floors and glass cabinets, distorting shadows into elongated shapes. Somewhere in the far reaches of that silence came the soft, rhythmic dripping of water, an oddly mundane sound within a room devoted to beauty. It was here, shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, that the night guard stumbled upon the curator, Arthur Lingley, chief custodian of the Renaissance wing, celebrated art historian, and a man whose temperament was known for unshakable precision was found lying unconscious on the cold parquet floor below a large, empty frame. His glasses lay shattered beside him. A thin cut traced along his temple. The ornate gilt frame above him, designed to cradle a painting valued at several £1 million, had been stripped bare. The painting itself, the solitary falcon, a 15th century masterpiece attributed to the enigmatic Artemisia Verdini, had vanished. And beneath the hollow frame, resting against the wainscoting as delicately as if placed by invisible fingers, was a single black feather dot. By the time Hercule Poirot arrived an hour later, summoned urgently by Inspector Calloway of the Halvern Metropolitan Police, a brittle tension gripped the museum staff, who had been roused from their beds and gathered anxiously in the main hall. Electric lights flickered sporadically as a storm rolled in, its distant thunder shaking the windows with low vibrations. The air felt charged, like the moments before a theatrical curtain rises upon a tragedy. Poirot stepped inside the East Gallery with his usual meticulous grace, pausing first to survey the doorway, then the walls, then finally the floor. Inspector Calloway followed, a stout man with a perpetual expression of irritation that deepened whenever he was confronted with a puzzle exceeding his patience. "This is the third time in 6 months." "Poirot," Calloway muttered, arms crossed. Another high-profile theft, another international embarrassment, and no signs of forced entry. "The board will demand answers before breakfast." Poirot adjusted the knot of his elegant tie. "Calm yourself, my friend. Precision, not panic, will yield the truths of this little drama." He tilted his head, observing the empty frame through narrowed eyes. The absence of the painting was more striking than the artwork itself could ever be. Where once had hung Verdini's depiction of a falcon perched upon a stone archway, its solitary figure rendered with delicate realism and luminous shadow, the gallery now presented an absence so profound it seemed almost theatrical. The wall behind the frame was pale, where centuries of varnish had been shielded by canvas. The brass clasps that held the painting were intact, unbroken. Poirot moved closer. "And the curator? He has spoken?" Calloway nodded. "He regained consciousness a few minutes ago, disoriented. Claims he was attacked by a masked figure who moved like a shadow. He insists the thief wore black gloves, black clothing, and absurdly some sort of feathered adornment." Poirot raised a brow. "Absurdity is often only truth in disguise, Inspector." He crouched to examine the feather resting on the floor. It was exceptionally long, its barbs smooth and glossy, clearly not from any commonplace bird. Poirot lifted it delicately using a handkerchief, turning it in the dim light. "Raven? No, too sleek. A bird of prey? Perhaps. But no bird native to England possesses such a feather naturally. Calloway groaned. So we're dealing with a theatrical burglar now? Poirot allowed a faint smile. Perhaps a burglar with a sense of artistry. A museum thief stealing a Renaissance painting may well wish to leave behind a Renaissance flourish. He straightened. Take me to Mr. Lingley. The curator had been moved to a nearby conservation room, where he sat on a low bench beneath a skylight, his face pale and his hands trembling. A thin blanket was draped around his shoulders. He seemed smaller than his usual commanding presence, diminished, not only by injury, but by shock. Poirot approached him gently. Mr. Lingley, I am Hercule Poirot. You are safe now. Please, tell me what you remember. Arthur Lingley blinked slowly, the world still shifting around him. I came to do a final check, he whispered. I could not sleep. I worried about the humidity levels. Foolish, perhaps, but I felt uneasy. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And then? The gallery lights had been dimmed for the night. I walked through with my torch. Everything was in order. And then, he squeezed his eyes shut. Poirot softened his tone. There is no need for drama, monsieur. Speak slowly. I felt watched, Lingley said, his voice cracking. At first, I dismissed it. But then I saw something movement in the far corner. A shape, dark, silent, as though it blended with the shadows. Before I could call out, someone rushed me. A figure tall, masked, dressed entirely in black. Something brushed across my face. Feathers, perhaps. I lost my footing. The room spun. He pressed a hand to his temple. I fell. I must have struck my head. And when I awoke, the painting was gone. Poirot exchanged a glance with Calloway. Did the attacker speak? Poirot asked. No, not a word. But I felt... Lingley hesitated. I felt that whoever it was had studied the gallery, knew exactly where to stand to avoid the camera's fields of vision. Poirot frowned. There are cameras? Calloway sighed. Of course there are cameras. State-of-the-art infrared system. But nothing shows anyone entering or leaving the gallery. Doors locked. Sensors inactive. Absolutely nothing. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. A thief who enters without being seen, and a curator attacked without witnesses. And all that remains is a solitary feather, which should not exist in nature. He paced slowly to the center of the room. Then we must consider that our intruder did not simply slip into the shadows. Perhaps, instead, the shadows themselves permitted the intruder's passage. Calloway sputtered. What are you implying? Poirot ignored him. He turned back to the curator. One more question, Mr. Lingley. Did anyone else know you would be here tonight? Lingley hesitated. Well, perhaps one or two of the staff. The head conservator. My assistant. They know I often perform late-night checks. Poirot nodded. Then we shall speak to them soon. He gestured toward the gallery again. Inspector, come. There is one final detail I wish to see. They returned to the empty frame. Poirot examined the lower molding carefully, his fingertips moving lightly across the carved gilding. There, he murmured suddenly. Calloway bent beside him. Where? Poirot pointed to a small indentation. A pressure mark. Very faint. It suggests that the painting was removed not by slipping it from its clasps, but by lifting the entire frame forward. Calloway frowned. Why lift the frame? Why not unhook the painting normally? Poirot tilted his head. Because the thief wanted to avoid making even the smallest sound. These museum clasps make a very delicate click when released. Enough to alert someone in the gallery. He stepped back. A thief who works in silence. Leaves behind a symbolic feather. Slips past cameras. And vanishes with a painting that could not fit through any ordinary exit. Unnoticed. Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden lucidity. Inspector, this is not a simple theft. It is a performance. Calloway huffed. A performance? With what audience? Poirot looked toward the darkened corridor beyond the gallery door. With an audience of one, the curator who saw only a fragment of the truth. And with a message for us. Mon ami, that the thief is confident, bold, and wishes to be admired. He lifted the black feather again, and every performance begins with a flourish. Poirot stepped back from the empty frame, his expression sharpening. The solitary falcon has flown, and in its place, our thief has left a calling card. But feathers and shadows do not vanish on their own. He turned toward the corridor. We shall follow them. Chapter 2. The gallery that echoed after midnight. Lights in the Grand Museum of Halvern had been reduced to their skeletal minimum. What had earlier been a blaze of brilliance for the public was now subdued to faint glows in corners and along escape routes, leaving much of the building in a muted half-darkness. Silence lay over the place like dust over an old frame, delicate, fragile, and easily disturbed. That it was into this silence that Hercule Poirot walked, his polished shoes making the softest of sounds against the marble and wood. Inspector Calloway came at his side, less quiet, his tread heavy, his frustration growing more substantial with each unanswered question. A uniformed guard followed a respectful distance behind them, his cap clutched in both hands, his expression uneasy. His name, Poirot had been told, was Thomas Ray, a man with 10 years of service and no previous blemish on his record. They moved along the main corridor, leading back toward the East Gallery. But Poirot did not go directly there. Instead, he paused at the junction between two wings of the museum, where the light from overhead fell in a pale, watery shaft through a glass pane in the ceiling. "Stop a moment," Poirot said quietly. Calloway, who had been bracing himself for another circuit of the same gallery, sighed. "What now?" Poirot tilted his head back, examining the long skylight that ran the length of the passage. "This glass, does it open?" Ray spoke quickly, grateful for something practical to answer. "Yes, sir. The central section can be opened for ventilation during the summer, but it is kept locked at all other times. I checked the mechanism myself earlier tonight. It was secure." Poirot lowered his gaze to the floor. The skylight's faint illumination fell across a long strip of parquet, revealing a detail that might otherwise have escaped attention, the bare suggestion of disrupted dust in a narrow line. He crouched carefully, ignoring the creak of Calloway's impatience. "There's a difference in the surface here, Inspector. See? The light catches it. The dust does not lie evenly. Something small has disturbed it, something dragged, not dropped." Calloway squinted, then shook his head. "If you say so. I can hardly see a thing." Poirot smiled faintly. "It is not your fault. Your eyes are trained for large disturbances. Broken locks, smashed cases, smashed heads. Mine are trained for smaller habits of mischief." He ran a fingertip just above the floor, not quite touching it. The disturbed dust formed a thin path, no wider than the width of a rope or cable, extending from the central point beneath the skylight toward the East Gallery. "Remarkable," Poirot murmured. "If our museum thief is as theatrical as I suspect, he did not simply appear in the gallery like a ghost. He entered this building in a manner consistent with his love of spectacle." Calloway stared at the faint trail. "You think he came from above?" "It is a possibility we must now consider very seriously." Poirot straightened. "We will verify the security of the skylight later. For now, let us see where this little path of disturbed dust takes us." They continued along the corridor. The museum seemed to lean in around them, listening. The shadows of statues and plinths seemed watchful. The faint hum of electrical systems and distant ventilation engines only emphasized the sense of emptiness after hours. Poirot followed the trail carefully. It was not continuous. The dust had been disturbed only in isolated patches, as though whatever had dragged along the floor had been lifted intermittently. But there was enough to trace a general direction. It led, unsurprisingly, toward the East Gallery. At the entrance, a heavy velvet rope barrier had been temporarily unhooked for the investigation. Poirot's attention immediately went to the rope itself, his eyes sharpening. "This is not the same rope that was here earlier," he remarked. Calloway frowned. "What do you mean?" "A rope is a rope." Poirot took the cord in both hands, letting it slide between his fingers. "You see the fraying here, halfway along? The fibers have been abraded, as though scraped against something with a rough edge. The rope did not acquire such damage by hanging politely between two posts. The guard cleared his throat. We had to move it aside when we brought Mr. Lingley out, sir. It might have caught on something then. Poirot shook his head. No, this is not the injury of a moment. It is more deliberate. The rope has borne weight. It has been strained. He walked past the entrance and into the gallery once more. The floor beneath the empty frame seemed to hold its breath. Poirot looked upward, tracing invisible lines from the ceiling to the floor. The gallery's vault arched high, the central section capped by another skylight. This one, larger and more impressive than the corridors. His gaze lingered on the reinforcing beams, then on a series of thick rings bolted into the ceiling supporting frame remnants of an earlier hanging system used for large installations. They are never removed entirely. These old conveniences, Poirot said softly. They are merely forgotten. Calloway followed his gaze. You think the thief may have lowered something down from the ceiling? Perhaps not lowered, Inspector, Poirot replied. But perhaps he descended himself. Rope, harness, careful calculation. A thief who arrives from above and leaves by the same route would never trouble the doors or the ground-level cameras. Calloway muttered. You are turning this into a circus act. Not I, Poirot answered mildly. The thief. He stepped to the center of the gallery and turned slowly, eyes taking in every detail. The pedestals, the benches, the security panels near the entrance, the discreet cameras mounted high in the corners. Then he walked to the far end, where an emergency exit door stood firmly locked, a security panel glowing red beside it. The camera showed no one? Poirot asked. Nothing, Calloway said. Continuous feed from closing time until the guard found Lingley. No recorded figure in black. No movement near the painting. The only motion was when Lingley himself entered the gallery at a little past midnight. Poirot nodded. Then either the cameras lie or they told only part of the truth. He turned. Mr. Ray, you mentioned hearing footsteps. The guard shifted nervously. Yes, sir. Tell me exactly what you heard. Ray swallowed. It was around 3 in the morning. I was in the security room watching the monitors. It was quiet, too quiet. You might say then. I heard them. Footsteps. Distinct. Somewhere along the east corridor. They were not hurried. Just steady. I thought perhaps one of the other guards was doing rounds, and I checked the rota. But they were all accounted for. And what did you do? Poirot asked. I switched the screens to the east wing cameras, sir. Every single one. But there was nobody there. The corridor was empty. The gallery doors were closed. Yet the sound continued for several seconds, then stopped. Poirot considered this. You are certain the sound came through the corridor microphones? Not from within the security room? Certain, sir. It came through the speaker. Calloway added, We checked the recordings. The sound is faint, but you can just make it out. Footsteps, but nothing appears in frame. Nothing at all. Poirot's eyes shone. A silent figure who leaves no image, yet whose presence is heard. The trick becomes more elaborate. Or the system glitched, Calloway muttered. Perhaps. Poirot's voice remained thoughtful. But let us not discard one mystery with another. Tell me, Mr. Ray, did the footsteps sound heavy or light? The guard frowned, searching his memory. Not particularly heavy. Not the clomp of boots. More. Measured. Confident. I would say they belonged to someone of medium build. Did they echo? Yes. The corridor carries sound in a particular way. You can always tell where someone is walking from the quality of the echo. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And from where did you judge these footsteps to originate? Near the junction by the skylight, sir. Close to where you noticed that dust. Poirot exchanged a look with Calloway. Then we are not dealing with mere ghosts. Someone walked there at 3 in the morning. Yet either they moved where the cameras could not see, or the cameras were made to lie. Calloway sighed. We've checked the logs. No interruption. No missing footage. No tampering markers. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Was the security room itself ever unattended? Only briefly, Ray said. I went to check on Mr. Lingley when the call came through about the curator being hurt. That was just past 1 o'clock. Another guard watched the screens while I was gone. Poirot nodded. Then at 3:30 in the morning, when the footsteps sounded. Where were you? Still in the security room. I did not leave again. Poirot's expression altered subtly. You say 3:30. That is precise. Ray glanced at Calloway. Sir? Calloway scowled. Tell him. The guard licked his lips. The security room clock. It stopped at 3:30. Right after the footsteps faded. Poirot's brows rose. Stopped? Permanently? Yes, sir. It froze. The hands locked. I tapped the glass, but nothing. We checked the wiring later. No fault we could find. Show me this clock, Poirot said quietly. They left the gallery and walked to the security room, a windowless space tucked behind a heavy metal door. Inside, the air was close, humming with the combined energy of servers, monitors, and recording equipment. Screens lined one wall, showing live feeds of various museum spaces. Entrance hall. Storage rooms, staircases, corridors dotted the far end of the room. Above an array of labeled switches and consoles hung a large, utilitarian clock. Its hands stood motionless at 3:30. Poirot approached it, his gaze keen. It is battery-powered? He asked. Mainline electric, Calloway answered. It is wired into the building. Backup battery in case of power cuts. But there were no cuts last night. At least none recorded. Poirot studied the clock face. No cracks, no signs of physical interference. He reached up and gently placed a hand against the frame. The clock did not resume. How long has it been here? He asked. Years, Ray replied. It has never malfunctioned before. Poirot tilted his head, as though listening to the silence where ticking ought to be. Time here has also chosen not to move, he said. As at the museum, so in its heart. He stepped back and turned his attention to the monitors. May I see the recording from the East Corridor on the time the footsteps were heard? Calloway nodded to Ray, who sat and began tapping commands into the console. One of the central screens flickered and then settled into a grainy black and white image of the empty corridor. A timestamp in the lower corner read 3 hours 12 minutes and 6 seconds. They watched in silence. The corridor remained empty, but the faint sound of footsteps began distant, echoing gently through unseen microphones. Poirot closed his eyes as he listened, shutting out the visual emptiness. The rhythm of the steps was even, steady, unhurried. There was no hesitation, no scramble, no hint of fear. A confident stride dotted 3 hours 13 minutes and 2 seconds. The sound ceased. Poirot opened his eyes. The corridor on the screen remained empty. The timestamp continued to move. 3 hours 13 minutes and 3 seconds. 3 hours 13 minutes and 4 seconds. And then, abruptly, froze. The image remained, unchanged. Like a still photograph. Ray swallowed hard. That is when the clock stopped, he said. The feed kept recording, or at least attempted to, but the image never advanced. The file is marked as live, yet no more frames exist. And the other cameras at that moment? Poirot asked. Normal, Calloway said grimly. Every other feed in the building continued as usual. Only this corridor camera froze. Only this clock stopped. Poirot's gaze traveled thoughtfully between the stalled image and the motionless clock. So, he said slowly, we have isolated interference. At precisely the moment someone or something walked through that corridor, one camera and one clock failed. Calloway ran a hand through his hair. I have had the technicians over it twice. They insist there is no logical explanation. No signal interruption, no hardware fault, no tampering. Poirot's voice was soft, but certain. Where there is no logical explanation, Inspector, we must conclude that we have not yet found the correct logic. He turned back to the clock, examining the casing more closely. Has anyone opened this since the failure? Not yet, Calloway admitted. I ordered it left as is, in case you wish to see it first. Poirot nodded. A wise decision. He requested a small stepladder, which Ray fetched promptly. Poirot ascended with surprising steadiness, unscrewed the front of the clock carefully, and lifted the glass away inside. The mechanism gleamed with unremarkable functionality. The wires appeared intact. The hands were fixed tightly to their axles. Poirot looked more closely at the base, where the device connected to the wall. There, almost imperceptible, was a faint smudge of dark residue near the lower edge of the casing. Poirot touched it lightly with a fingertip, then held his finger up to the light. "A grease," he said quietly. "Slightly gritty. Not from the factory. Applied afterward." Calloway frowned. "Meaning what?" "Meaning that someone may have interfered with the contact point. A narrow piece of insulating material, perhaps inserted to interrupt the mechanism. Removed later." Poirot descended the ladder thoughtfully. But to stop a clock so precisely once, and then restore power without leaving obvious evidence, this is the work of careful hands. He regarded Ray. "Who has access to this room?" "Only security staff and the technical team," Ray answered. "And occasionally the director or senior administrators when reviewing footage. Can it be locked from the inside?" Poirot asked. "Yes, sir. But we never lock it during regular operation. Someone is always meant to be here." Poirot's eyes moved again to the frozen clock. "The thief, that is. The one who wishes to control time in this building has not only an understanding of art," he said slowly. "He has an understanding of its guardians, of their equipment, of their habits." Calloway impatiently snapped his notebook shut. "So where does that leave us? With a theatrical burglar who can climb through skylights, silent shoes that leave no image, and an invisible hand that stops clocks?" Poirot offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "No, Inspector. It leaves us with a careful planner. One who rehearses. One who tests the limits of the system before striking. And one who chooses his symbols with care." He lifted the black feather again, which he had carried in his pocket since first examining it. "Look at this feather," he said. "It is too neat, too placed, to be accidental. And now we have footsteps that are heard but not seen, and a timepiece that refuses to move at the precise moment of those steps." He placed the feather gently on the console beneath the frozen clock. "I begin to suspect that our thief is not merely a burglar. He is a designer. He creates scenes as a painter creates compositions. Each element chosen, each detail deliberate." Calloway ground his teeth. "I have little patience for criminals who treat their crimes as art." Poirot's voice softened. "They are less concerned with the law than with being understood. In the end, that will be their undoing. They cannot resist the urge to be admired." He turned to the guard. "Mr. Ray, until further notice, no one is to enter this security room without being accompanied and logged. I want to know who examines these systems and when." Ray nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Poirot moved back toward the door. "We shall return to the gallery," he said. "There is something about that empty frame that troubles me still. An echo, perhaps, of the footsteps, one that has not yet been heard." Calloway followed reluctantly. "You think you will hear it by staring at a wall?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Walls talk, my friend. They talk when paint fades, when dust settles, when frames are moved. One must only learn how to listen." They stepped out of the security room and back into the museum's dim corridors. Behind them, the clock continued to stand motionless at 3:13, marking not the passing of time, but the precise moment when time itself had been taken hostage. As Poirot walked toward the East Gallery again, his mind was already arranging the clues like pieces of a delicate puzzle. The feather, the disturbed dust beneath the skylight, the frayed rope, the frozen clock. The unheard but very real footsteps. Somewhere among these details was the first clear line he could follow to the thief, and he knew, with that quiet certainty that came upon him at the outset of a worthy challenge, that this crime was not yet complete. It was only beginning to speak. Chapter 3. The trio with something to hide. Morning light had begun to seep through the tall windows of the Grand Museum, scattering pale rectangles across the marble floors. Though dawn had technically arrived, the atmosphere inside was anything but renewed. The museum staff moved quietly, speaking in low murmurs, exchanging uneasy glances as though the walls themselves might be listening. An air of wounded dignity clung to the building. The theft of the solitary falcon had struck at its very soul. In the private conference chamber, the one normally reserved for donor meetings, budget debates, and press announcements. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of a polished oak table. Inspector Calloway settled beside him, rubbing sleep from his eyes, but still maintaining his usual irritable alertness. Across from them waited the three individuals Poirot had specifically requested to see, each seated at carefully chosen intervals along the length of the table. They formed a peculiar tableau united not by camaraderie, but by shared tension, by the knowledge that proximity to the crime placed each of them beneath the keen scrutiny of the world's most exacting detective. Poirot steepled his fingers, letting his eyes drift from one face to the next. Three people closest to the curator. Three who had access to both the gallery and the painting. Three who had reason to fear what the night's events might expose. He began with the one whose nerves were most visibly frayed. The art restorer with careworn hands, Sophia Linton. The museum's senior art restorer sat to Poirot's left and shoulders hunched, hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles blanched white. Though she was in her early 40s, her dark blonde hair was pinned into a style that attempted a formality she did not feel. Her pale blue eyes flicked anxiously between Poirot and the door, as though escape might be required at any moment. Poirot inclined his head politely. "Miss Linton, thank you for speaking with us. I understand this is a distressing morning." Sophia's voice was soft, tinged with exhaustion. "It is devastating, Mr. Poirot. The painting. To lose it now, after all our preparations. It feels like a betrayal of everything we stood for." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "Tell me, if you would, how long have you been responsible for the care of the solitary falcon?" 3 years, she answered, sitting straighter as she spoke of her work. The painting came to the museum as part of a long-term loan arrangement. Its wooden panel is delicate, vulnerable to fluctuations in temperature and humidity. I have monitored it closely. Poirot's voice softened. Yet I understand you had concerns, grave concerns about its condition. Sophia inhaled sharply. I did. I still do. The paint layer had begun to show signs of micro-cracking. I urged Mr. Lingley to approve a temporary removal from display so that I could perform stabilization procedures. He refused. Calloway leaned forward. "How forcefully did you argue your case?" Sophia flushed. "I lost my temper. I rarely do, but when it comes to preservation, compromise can doom a masterpiece." I told him that if he insisted on displaying the painting for the exhibition, he risked irreversible damage. He said I was being melodramatic. Poirot waited a beat, then asked gently, "And when did this conversation occur?" 2 days ago. "And last night?" "Where were you?" Sophia shifted uneasily. "At home. I live only a few minutes' walk from here. I went to bed early. I was preparing notes for my presentation at the exhibition unveiling. I didn't leave my flat again." Poirot gazed at her thoughtfully. "And you live alone?" "Yes, completely alone." Calloway scribbled something in his notebook, though Poirot suspected the inspector already distrusted the alibi. Poirot, for his part, said nothing yet. Instead, he allowed his eyes to linger on the woman's hands, delicate but steady, the hands of someone accustomed to handling fragile treasures. Capable hands. Skilled hands. Hands that could, perhaps, remove a painting from its frame without leaving a trace. Poirot moved on. 2. The historian. With accost to the center right of the table sat Professor Lionel Drake, a tall and wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. His tweed coat appeared to have been slept in, and his graying hair jutted at odd angles, suggesting that he had dragged his hands through it repeatedly in frustration. Where Sophia Linton appeared cowed by the situation. Professor Drake looked affronted by it. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Poirot, I wish to state from the outset that I have devoted my entire professional life to the preservation of historical truth. I had no part in this heinous crime." Poirot smiled faintly. "You are very eager to reassure us, Professor. It is admirable, though sometimes early reassurances pose more questions than answers." Drake bristled. "I merely wish to prevent any misunderstanding. I have nothing to hide." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "I have been told you and Mr. Lingley had a disagreement regarding the placement of the painting." Drake's eyebrows shot up. A disagreement? I should hope so. Lingley insisted on displaying the solitary falcon in the East Gallery, one of the worst possible locations. The lighting is too harsh. The foot traffic unpredictable. I argued it should be moved to the Renaissance alcove on the second floor, where the painting's historical context could be better appreciated. Poirot nodded. A scholarly concern. A passionate one, Drake corrected. Artemisia Verdini is my area of expertise. I have written extensively on her symbolic motifs. The falcon in that painting is not merely decorative. It represents her ideological break with the Florentine school. To treat it as a decorative centerpiece for a gala, he stopped himself, realizing he had begun to rant. Poirot interjected smoothly, yet Mr. Lingley refused to relocate it. Drake's face darkened. He did, and he dismissed my objections with infuriating condescension. He said donors preferred dramatic placement to academic nitpicking. Your alibi? Poirot asked. I was at the university library until close to midnight, reviewing archival notes. After that, I walked home alone. I did not re-enter the museum. I had no reason to. No reason? Poirot was not so sure. He noted the professor's restless tapping fingers, the tension in his shoulders, the thin sheen of perspiration along his hairline. Academic pride was a powerful force, and academic humiliation an even more powerful motive. The professor had knowledge of Verdini's techniques, the symbolism of the falcon, and perhaps even of the painting's vulnerabilities. He knew how to handle Renaissance artifacts. He had as much access to the gallery as anyone. Poirot made another quiet note in his mind. The patron with the dazzling smile at the far end of the table sat Eleanor Armitage, the wealthy patron whose generosity had made the exhibition possible. She was impeccably dressed in tailored silk, her silver and emerald earrings catching the soft light like miniature chandeliers. Her makeup was flawless, her posture graceful, her voice lilting with effortless charm. But Poirot noticed something else behind the charm. Calculation. Miss Armitage, Poirot said pleasantly, you have been most patient. Tell us, please, what this exhibition means to you. She smiled a disarmingly warm smile that did not reach her eyes. Mr. Poirot, this exhibition is the culmination of years of funding and planning. I adore the Renaissance. I believe that sharing its beauty with the public elevates us all. The solitary falcon was to be the crown jewel of the opening night. Poirot nodded. I understand you had an argument with Mr. Lingley only yesterday. Her smile faltered. If insisting on proper acknowledgement in the program counts as an argument, then yes. Arthur can be forgetful. But we resolved it. Resolved? Poirot repeated softly. Ms. Armitage leaned forward. Look, Mr. Poirot, I sank a considerable sum of money into this exhibition. If the museum looks incompetent, so do I. The theft embarrasses me. It undermines my reputation. Why would I sabotage my own investment? Calloway folded his arms. Access, motive, opportunity, all three apply to you as much as to anyone. She exhaled sharply. I attended a gala dinner last night at the Halvern Club. The mayor was present. Half the committee members were present. I was seen by dozens. Poirot raised a brow. Until what hour? She hesitated. I left around midnight. Perhaps shortly after. Poirot tapped softly on the table. Did you come here at any point last night? Her gaze wavered, just enough to be noticed. I drove past the museum, she said. But I did not enter. Poirot's voice remained polite. Why did you pass by? She forced a smile. I enjoy seeing the exhibition banners illuminated at night. It reassures me that the museum is ready. Poirot said nothing, but he filed the detail meticulously. Benefactors often had more control over staff than they admitted. And benefactors often had secrets that money alone could not shield. He let silence settle over the room for several long seconds. 4. 3 stories. 3 shadows. Poirot stood slowly, smoothing the front of his suit. You will forgive me if I speak plainly, he said, addressing the trio. You each present polite accounts of your whereabouts. Each is possible. Each is incomplete. And each conceals something, not necessarily guilt, but truth. The three exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot walked behind their chairs, observing each in turn. "Miss Linton, you fear for the painting's safety. You fought to protect it, even when your counsel was refused. Your concern is admirable, but also impassioned." Sophia swallowed hard. "Professor Drake," Poirot continued, "you devote your life to the history behind a painting. You wished it to be properly contextualized. Respect for the past can inspire the noblest deeds. And the most regrettable." Drake stiffened. "And Miss Armitage." Poirot stopped behind her chair. "You possess influence, money, connections, and pride. Pride is a powerful motivator, especially when one's reputation depends on flawless execution." Miss Armitage's fingers twitched against the cushioned tabletop. Poirot returned to the head of the table. "You each had access to the gallery. You each had disagreements with Mr. Lingley, and you each have reasons, personal, professional, or financial, for the events of last night to trouble you deeply." Sophia whispered, trembling, "Are you saying you believe one of us stole the painting?" Poirot clasped his hands. "I say only this. The truth hides itself where pride, ambition, and fear converge. The painting did not vanish into thin air. Someone planned its disappearance. And each of you," he paused for effect, "possesses one piece of that plan, whether you know it or not." A heavy silence filled the room. Poirot's voice lowered. "Do not mistake me. I do not yet accuse. I only observe. And observation is the first step toward revelation." Calloway cleared his throat, sensing the tension reaching its peak. "Mr. Poirot will, of course, require formal statements from each of you. For now, you may return to your duties within reason. No one leaves the building." The trio rose slowly. Sophia lingered longest, looking lost and exhausted. Drake stormed out in a huff of wounded pride. Miss Armitage walked with her usual elegant composure, but Poirot noticed her rapid, shallow breaths as she exited the doorway. When the chamber was empty, except for Poirot and Calloway, the inspector let out a long sigh. "This is getting complicated." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "Ah, but complication is the beloved playground of the criminal mind. Those who commit simple crimes often betray themselves quickly. But those who construct elaborate puzzles, who stage scenes with feathers and shadows and frozen clocks, they reveal something deeper." He glanced at the empty chairs. "They reveal vanity." Calloway snorted. "So which of them is lying?" "All three," Poirot said softly. "But each lies for reasons unique to themselves. The question is, which lie matters, and which simply distracts?" He walked to the window overlooking the East Gallery entrance. "Find out everything about their movements last night, Inspector. Their financial records, their correspondence with the curator, their personal disputes. And you?" Calloway asked. Poirot smiled. "I shall revisit the painting's frame." "Again?" "An artist revisits a canvas," Poirot replied, "because new light reveals new truths. And I begin to suspect that the thief left behind something far more revealing than a feather." He tapped his temple lightly. "We have 3 suspects with something to hide, but only one thief, and only one truth." Poirot turned away, his silhouette framed by the rising light of dawn. "This museum," he whispered, "has not yet finished speaking." Chapter 4. The painting behind the painting. The curator's private office was tucked away behind the administrative corridor, removed from the grandeur of the public galleries and their reverent silence. Here the ceilings were lower, the walls lined with filing cabinets instead of gilt frames, and the air carried the faint, familiar scent of paper, dust, and recently brewed coffee. It was a working space, not a ceremonial one, a place where art, stripped of glamour, became inventory, documentation, and responsibility. Hercule Poirot entered with Inspector Calloway at his side. Arthur Lingley sat at his desk, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him. His complexion had improved slightly since their earlier conversation, but bruising had begun to darken along one side of his face, and he held himself with cautious stiffness, as if any sudden movement might betray a hidden ache. He looked up as they entered. "Must we do this now?" he asked quietly. "There is so much to manage." The board will demand explanations. The insurance agents will descend. I feel as though I am being crushed from all sides. Poirot studied him with a gaze that was sympathetic, yet unyielding. I do not doubt the weight upon your shoulders, Mr. Lingley, but if we do not examine matters now, when details are fresh, the truth will begin to blur. Truth, like a painting, must be examined before dust has a chance to settle upon it. Calloway cleared his throat pointedly. We'd like to see your working materials. Any sketches, notes, correspondence about the exhibition, particularly those that concern the solitary falcon. Lingley hesitated, then gestured to a row of metal drawers. The exhibition files are there. You are welcome to them. The desk contains my personal notes. And before you ask, yes, I have already given you everything I know about last night. I cannot add more. Poirot moved around the room, taking in the space as a whole before focusing on its contents. The office was crowded but orderly shelves of catalogs, numbered binders, boxes marked with accession codes. On one wall, pinned above a low-side table, hung several small prints and reproductions of works from the exhibition, arranged like index cards in an invisible narrative. One of them, however, was different. May I? Poirot asked, stepping toward the table. Lingley nodded wearily. Help yourself. On the table lay a leather portfolio well worn, its corners softened by frequent handling. Beside it, a cluster of graphite pencils, a kneaded eraser, and a magnifying visor told their own story. Poirot opened the portfolio carefully. Inside were sketches. Some were quick impressionistic studies of gallery layouts, drawn from overhead like architectural plans. Others were more detailed renderings of specific paintings, captured with the focus of someone who had spent many hours in their presence. The missing Verdini piece appeared multiple times among them, the stone archway, the falcon perched in its solitary majesty, the play of shadow against the carved masonry. Poirot turned one page, then another dotted first. The drawings were straightforward copies. The falcon alone, the arch alone, the surrounding negative space mapped with clinical attention. Then, after several pages, the tone shifted dot in one sketch. The stone archway seemed darker, as though shaded with increasing pressure. In another, the background behind the arch appeared not empty, but suggestive lines that might be read as foliage or curtain-like drapery, or shadows not fully resolved. Poirot felt a quiet stirring of recognition. He turned another page dot, then he found it. The sketch showed the solitary falcon in full, arch, bird, and background. But behind the arch, barely visible unless one looked closely, stood a shape that had never been part of the original painting. A figure, cloaked, hooded. Its face was obscured, its edges softened as though emerging from shadow. Poirot did not speak at once. He studied it with deliberate care, his expression unreadable. Calloway, peering over his shoulder, frowned. That is not in the painting, is it? No, Lingley said sharply, the word bursting out of him before he could contain it. Poirot glanced up. The curator's face had drained of color. His eyes were fixed on the sketch, wide and strained. Double quotes, Mr. Lingley, Poirot said quietly. You know this drawing well. Lingley swallowed. I did not think you would find that. Poirot detached the sheet from the portfolio and laid it flat on the table. You drew this, yes? Yes, Lingley whispered. Poirot's voice remained gentle, but it carried a firm undercurrent. Then tell me why you altered the painting in your sketch. Why you added a cloaked figure where none exists in Verdini's original. Lingley's gaze flickered between Poirot, the sketch, and the far wall, as though seeking escape. You do not understand, he said at last. I did not add the figure. It added itself. Calloway's exasperation rose instantly. Do not start with nonsense. Pencils do not move of their own accord. Lingley pressed both hands flat against the table, as though bracing himself. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I know. But that is what happened. Poirot inclined his head. Explain it to us, slowly. The curator took a shuddering breath. When the solitary falcon arrived at the museum, I made an initial sketch for my own study. It is a habit of mine. Sketching helps me absorb spatial relationships, tonal balance, compositional choices. The first sketch was faithful. Completely faithful. I remember it clearly. The arch, the bird, the empty space behind. No figure. Poirot nodded. And then? Then, weeks later, I returned to the sketchbook. I meant merely to reference the falcon's posture. But when I looked at the drawing, I saw that figure. He gestured helplessly at the cloaked shape. I thought I had inadvertently darkened part of the background. At first, I told myself it was only my imagination. But each time I revisited the sketch, the figure seemed more distinct. The hood more defined. The outline sharper. As though someone had added to it when I was not looking. Added to it when I was not looking. Added to it when I was not looking. Or as though I had done so unconsciously. Calloway snorted. You expect us to believe a ghostly hand drew itself into your notes? No, Lingley snapped, sudden anger flaring through his fear. I expect you to believe that I began to question my own perception. Poirot's gaze remained intent. You never saw anyone else with this portfolio? No, it never leaves my office. Poirot looked down at the drawing. The lines of the cloaked figure were indeed consistent with the rest of the sketch. Same pressure, same pencil softness, same hand. But there was a hesitancy in those lines, a trembling quality, as though drawn by someone not entirely sure they wished the figure to exist. When did you first notice the change? Poirot asked. Approximately 3 weeks ago. Did you tell anyone? Lingley hesitated. No, why not? The curator's shoulders sagged. Because this museum runs on perception and reputation. If the curator admits to seeing mysterious figures appearing in his private sketches, he invites questions about his sanity. I convinced myself it was nothing fatigue, stress, and overactive imagination. He looked at the sketch again, shuddering. And then, a few days later, I dreamed of the painting. But in the dream, the archway was not empty. The figure stood there, clear, solid, as though it had always belonged. The hooded head turned. The falcon flew. Calloway rolled his eyes. Dreams, sketches. This is not evidence. It is anxiety. Poirot silenced him with a gesture. Did anything else unusual occur? Lingley swallowed. Only small things. On 2 occasions, when I inspected the painting in the gallery, I had the distinct impression that something had shifted in the background. Nothing I could point to. Nothing quantifiable. But the sense lingered. You did not adjust the lighting, Poirot asked, or the angle of view. Perhaps I did, without consciously noting it. I told myself it was a trick of light or tiredness. But the feeling persisted that there was something standing behind the arch, just beyond the reach of clarity. Poirot studied him. And did you ever connect this impression with the feather left beneath the missing frame? Lingley blinked. The feather? Poirot lifted the black feather from his pocket and placed it gently beside the sketch. This was found at the scene of the theft. A dark, elegant flourish. The sort of theatrical detail a person might associate with a cloaked figure. Lingley's eyes widened. Are you suggesting that the thief? Poirot interrupted softly. I suggest only that whoever stole the painting intended us to associate their act with shadows. With hoods. With the notion of something half seen, half imagined. Calloway frowned. So now we are dealing with a criminal who reads symbolist essays for fun? Poirot smiled faintly. Some thieves steal for money. Others steal for narrative. I believe our visitor dwells firmly in the second category. He turned back to Lingley. Let us be clear. There is a rational explanation for your sketch. Either you added the figure yourself, consciously or unconsciously, or someone else at some point had access to this portfolio and altered it. In either case, the presence of this cloaked figure here and the feather in the gallery suggests that you were being prepared. Conditioned, perhaps. Lingley's breathing quickened. Prepared for what? For the crime, Poirot said quietly. Or rather, for the story that was meant to surround it. He lifted the sketch slightly, examining the edges of the paper. There is no indentation from any projection, no trace of tracing lines. This figure sits within your original graphite work. It did not appear by magic. It was drawn. The question is, by whom? Lingley rubbed his forehead. I do not remember drawing it. Memory, Poirot said gently, is a room with many corners. Shadows gather there. It is possible that in a moment of anxiety, you embellished your own sketch, not knowing why. It is equally possible that someone who wished to unnerve you, someone with access to this office, added the figure while you were absent. Calloway looked around the room. Who has keys to this office? Lingley answered, myself, the director, the head of security, and for cleaning access, the supervisory staff. That is all. Any of them artistic? Poirot asked mildly. Lingley let out a humorless laugh. Not to my knowledge. Poirot set the sketch down flat again and leaned over it, his gaze tracing the faint lines around the figure's outline. Notice, Inspector. The cloak is long, the hood deep. No face visible. This is a design intended to obscure identity completely. A shape, not a person. An archetype. Calloway grunted. An archetype with a crow feather. Possibly. Poirot considered. But feathers and cloaks are practical as well as symbolic. They disguise physical form. They mislead witnesses. A hooded, feathered thief becomes a story rather than a description. He straightened, and stories spread more quickly than details. Lingley spoke again, his voice low. I did see something last night just before I was struck. A dark figure moving in the corner. It could have been the light playing tricks. But he looked at the sketch. It felt familiar, as though it had stepped out of the drawing. Poirot regarded him steadily. Fear has a remarkable ability to project itself onto what we think we see. But it is also a compass, if we interpret it correctly. Your fear tells me that whoever did this wanted you unsettled. They wanted you to hesitate, to doubt your own mind. Why? Lingley whispered. Because a hesitant witness is a poor one, Poirot replied. And an uncertain curator is easy to discredit. Calloway frowned. Discredit? Yes. Imagine this scenario. Poirot began to pace slowly. A painting is stolen. The curator claims to have seen a cloaked, hooded figure associated with mysterious sketches that altered themselves. He speaks of faint impressions of movement in the painted background. Is he taken seriously? Or is he quietly deemed unstable? Lingley shut his eyes. Poirot's tone softened. You are being set up, Mr. Lingley, not merely as a victim, but as a potential scapegoat. If the theft had gone differently, if certain details had emerged differently, you might easily have been portrayed as a man in the midst of a breakdown. Convenient, is it not, if questions of negligence, access, or complicity arise? Calloway's eyes narrowed. So the thief is not just theatrical. He is strategic. Very much so, Poirot said. He does not simply remove a painting. He rearranges the narrative around it. He tapped the sketch. This image is one more piece of that rearrangement. Lingley looked up, his eyes haunted. What should I do? For now, Poirot said, you will do nothing unusual. Continue your duties, answer questions honestly, and do not attempt to conceal your fears. The more you try to hide them, the more suspicious you will seem. Leave the interpretation of those fears to me. He turned to Calloway. We will need samples of all staff handwriting and sketches where available. Cross-comparisons may reveal whether anyone else habitually draws cloaked figures in the margins of their lives. Calloway nodded. I will arrange it. Poirot carefully slipped the sketch into a protective sleeve. This will form part of our evidence. It tells us that the idea of a hooded presence had already taken root in this building before the theft. Perhaps not only in the curator's mind. He looked around the small office again, taking in every object, every drawer, every angle. There is something else here, he murmured. Something that does not yet wish to be seen. Lingley stared at him. What do you mean? Poirot did not answer directly. He moved to a filing cabinet, scanning the labels. Exhibition planning, inventory logs, conservation reports. He paused at the bottom drawer. MISC, personal notes, old exhibitions. He opened it. Inside were folders from previous shows, half-filled notebooks, and loose sheets of paper. Each cluster told of past concerns, past triumphs, past anxieties that no longer mattered. But near the back, wedged between two older binders, Poirot found a narrow tube cardboard, capped at both ends. He pulled it out. "Is this yours, Mr. Lingley?" Lingley squinted. "Yes, that should contain an earlier layout sketch for the East Gallery." Poirot opened it and gently unrolled the paper within dot. It was indeed a top-down plan of the East Gallery. But the solitary falcon was not placed centrally in this drawing. It was tucked along a side wall, near a service door, partially obscured by another installation. Lingley frowned. "That is strange. I drew that when we first started planning. We later decided to make the painting the focal point. I thought I had discarded the old design." Poirot traced a fingertip along the original placement. "So at first, the painting was not meant to be under the skylight." "No. Who suggested moving it?" Lingley hesitated. "It emerged in a planning meeting. Professor Drake argued for a better contextual spot, but Eleanor Armitage sided with me. She said donors expected drama. I confess, I liked the idea. I felt it would anchor the exhibition." Poirot nodded slowly, and placing it beneath the skylight in the center made it not only dramatic, but accessible from above. He rolled the sketch up again. "Someone," he said, "saw this earlier layout and thought, no, for my purposes, I need the painting there. Under the glass, visible from the rafters. A pedestal, waiting." Lingley swallowed. "You think a painting was moved for the thief's convenience?" "I think the thief nudged you where they wished you to go," Poirot replied. "Not overtly. Not by command. By suggestion. By leveraging your desire for a striking display. By feeding into Miss Armitage's taste for spectacle. By fanning Professor Drake's irritation so that he would argue against the change, thereby making you more determined to keep it." He set the tube aside. The cloaked figure. The feather. The layout. The frozen clock. These are all designs. And designers do not waste lines. Calloway looked at the curator. "Anyone else ever see these sketches? This old layout?" Lingley shook his head slowly. "They were kept here. In this drawer. Unless someone went looking." Poirot turned, his eyes keen. "Yes, unless someone went looking." He slid the drawer closed dot as they left the office. Poirot's mind arranged the morning's discoveries into a pattern that was not yet clear, but no longer entirely blurred. A painting stolen. A frame left hanging in the dark. A black feather. Disturbed dust beneath the skylight. A rope frayed from bearing weight. A security clock frozen in mid-tick dot, and now a sketch, the solitary falcon, with a ghost that did not belong. The ghost itself, Poirot felt sure, did not exist, but the person who had carefully placed its idea into the curator's mind most certainly did, and that person was still inside the museum. Chapter 5. The Lantern in the Archive Vault. The Rue de Mise, the lantern in the archive vault. Storm that had threatened the city throughout the night finally reached the museum by mid-afternoon. Though it brought little rain at first, the clouds rolled in with startling speed, gathering above the Grand Museum of Halvern like a dark shroud. The wind moaned against the older sections of the building, rattling glass panes and sending a persistent hum through the ventilation shafts. By evening, the staff moved more quickly through the corridors, anxious to complete their tasks before the worst of the weather arrived. Poirot noticed their nervous energy as he passed through the lower floors, listening to the whispers of custodians and junior archivists who glanced uneasily at the flickering lights overhead. Even Inspector Calloway, who prided himself on being immune to theatrics, occasionally shot a wary look upward as the ceiling lamps dimmed in erratic pulses, shortly after 6 o'clock. As Poirot and Calloway reviewed security logs in a ground-floor office, the building was overtaken by a sudden, violent flash followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder that vibrated through the foundations. And then the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the corridors. A few seconds later, emergency generators rumbled to life. The lights returned, but only partially. Half the museum glowed with a steady yellow emergency illumination. The other half remained dark, including the lower archive levels. Calloway hissed through his teeth. Perfect. As if things weren't complicated enough. Poirot merely straightened his tie. Do not despair, Inspector. Criminal minds often rely upon confusion. A disruption may cause them to reveal themselves. Calloway reached for the internal radio and barked orders. All guards report. Confirm emergency lighting status and double-check lower levels. Through the static came scattered confirmations, each announcing areas checked and secured. But then a pause, a crackle, and a nervous voice. Security to Inspector Calloway. There's something odd in the archive vault. Calloway stiffened. Odd in what way? Another crackle. There's a lantern, sir. An old museum lantern. It's lit. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Lit? But the outage occurred only moments ago. Yes, sir. But the lantern looks like it's been burning for a while. Calloway muttered under his breath, snatched a flashlight from the desk, and gestured to Poirot. Come on, then. Let's see what else your theatrical burglar has planned. Poirot followed, calm and deliberate as ever. Lanterns, feathers, sketches of cloaked figures. There is a consistent language forming, Inspector. One of shadows and stagecraft. Calloway shot him an irritated glance. I hope your criminal's language includes helpful words like confession. They descended 2 flights of stairs and crossed a long service hallway until they reached a heavily reinforced door marked Archive Vault Authorized Staff Only. 2 guards waited there, pale in the emergency lighting. One pointed down the stairwell. It's through the lower vault entrance. We didn't touch anything, just saw the glow. Calloway went first. Poirot followed with measured steps. The air grew colder as they descended, carrying the dry scent of old documents, wood, and chemical preservatives. The corridor at the base of the stairs was pitch dark until Calloway powered on his flashlight. At the end of the corridor, through the metal bars of an open gate, a faint amber glow flickered from within the archive vault. Not an electric light. Not an emergency lamp. A flame. Calloway exhaled sharply. That's a fire hazard waiting to happen. But Poirot touched his arm. Wait for what? The place to burn down? Poirot raised a gloved hand. Observe before we extinguish, Inspector. The placement of such a lantern during a power failure, no less, is not accident. It is deliberate. Calloway grumbled, but conceded. They stepped inside. The lantern among the shelves. Underground archive vault was a cavernous room lined with metal shelving from floor to ceiling. Wooden crates, archival boxes, bundles of rolled canvases, and thick catalogs filled every shelf, overflowed onto carts, and stood stacked in narrow aisles. The lantern sat atop a waist-high storage crate in the center of the vault, its flame dancing quietly. Inside the glass casing, the site was deeply anachronistic, an artifact of 19th century. Museum maintenance now burning. Like a beacon in the darkness, Poirot approached with reverence, as though observing an item in a ritual. Inspector, do not touch it yet. The lantern's placement is meaningful. Calloway swept his flashlight around the chamber. Meaningful or not, someone broken down here. Who has access? Only the archival staff and senior curators, Poirot mused. But access means nothing to a thief who enters from above. He kneeled beside the lantern. Its fuel reservoir was half full. Far more than could have been added moments ago. This flame has burned for some time, he murmured. Whoever lit it came before the outage. Calloway glanced around the shelves. So someone was down here long before the power cut. And we have no record of anyone entering. Poirot nodded. Which means our thief not only knows the security blind spots, he knows the underbelly of the museum as well. He stood. Let us search, slowly, carefully. 2. Footprints in a circle. Calloway swept the floor with his flashlight beam. At first, all seemed unremarkable. Just the smooth concrete surface and a few scattered specks of dust. But Poirot walked with the lantern's glow reflected in his eyes, scanning for details as subtle as the whisper of a shadow, and soon he found them. Inspector, shine your light here. Calloway complied. Barely visible except in angled illumination were faint traces of footprint, smudges of fine dust left by shoes. forming a pattern not random but precise. Poirot guided the beam slowly. Do you see? The footprints form a path, a wide circle around the central shelves. Calloway squinted. Why circle the shelves? Why not walk straight to some target? That, Poirot replied, is exactly the point. This circling is deliberate. Someone was not merely moving through. Someone was searching. Slowly, repeatedly. He moved along the faint loop, tracing it with careful steps. The prints overlap in several places. And then, he stopped abruptly. The prints end. Here. Calloway's flashlight landed on a large storage crate, pushed partially beneath a metal rack. The dust around it was disturbed. The trail of footprints stopped facing it directly. Poirot knelt and examined the crate's front panel, a metal latch, a museum lock, and something new, a fresh indentation where a tool had been used. Calloway crouched beside him. Forced? No, tested, Poirot replied. Someone attempted to open it, then realized it was locked, and then wisely stopped. Poirot stood and motioned to the guards. Fetch the key for this crate. One guard hurried off. Calloway frowned. What exactly are we expecting to find inside? Poirot looked at the lantern burning steadily on its crate. A message, he said softly. And perhaps a truth long concealed. 3. The locked crate, when the guard returned with the key, his hands shook slightly. The vault felt colder now, as though the flame consumed the warmth around rather than giving it. Calloway took the key. Ready? He muttered. Poirot nodded. Calloway inserted the key, turned it sharply, and pulled open the crate. Inside lay fragments of wood. Old wood. Splintered, discolored by time, and not simply scraps. Poirot reached in and lifted one piece. A carved corner joint with traces of faded gilding. Another fragment bore the delicate indentation of Renaissance tooling. Another showed a portion of an ornamental border. Calloway blinked. Is that a picture frame? Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, and not merely any frame. One of great age. One that once held a painting. The solitary falcon? Poirot studied the carved joint. Not exactly. Verdini's painting arrived in the museum in its original frame. This is something different. He set the fragments down carefully. Then he saw something else nestled at the bottom of the crate. Inspector, Poirot said, there is a document. Calloway reached in and retrieved a thin envelope sealed with brittle wax that had cracked long ago. The parchment looked old, far older than the crate's external markings suggested. Poirot accepted it gently, as though handling a relic of lost time. The envelope bore a handwritten title, For the Keeper of the East Wing, to be opened only in direst necessity. Poirot looked up, eyes glittering. Direst necessity, he repeated quietly. I believe that describes our present circumstance. He broke the aged seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting inside was elegant, sweeping, and unmistakably from a bygone era. Poirot began to read aloud. 4. The letter in the dark. To whomever shall inherit charge of these holdings, know that the painting which the world believes to be Artemisia Verdini's, the solitary falcon, is not entirely what it seems. In the year 1884, a fire consumed a portion of the Halvern archive, destroying the Northern Restoration Studio. Among the items damaged was the original panel bearing the falcon. The painting was grievously scorched, its surface peeled and darkened. The museum could not bear the shame of losing its rare Verdini treasure. And thus, with reluctance and trembling conscience, a copy was commissioned, a masterful copy, created by an unknown workshop, using portions of the salvageable fragments. These fragments were embedded behind the new panel, concealed beneath filler. The public was never told. Nor were most of the staff. Only the keeper of the East Wing was entrusted with this knowledge, sworn to protect both the museum's honor and the truth that lay hidden. The frame stored herein once held the damaged remains of Verdini's original work. These remnants were locked away so that no eye might judge the museum's shame. If this letter is found, it means the time for secrecy has ended. May the truth be carried with dignity. Signed, Clara H. Morton, Keeper of the East Wing, 1884. The chamber fell silent. Nothing in the storm above, nor the flickering flame beside them, could diminish the weight of the revelation. Calloway stared at Poirot. "Are we reading what I think we're reading? The painting. It's a forgery?" Poirot folded the letter with great care. "Not a forgery. A sanctioned copy. A museum secret. And the original, what remains of it, is here." Calloway gestured at the wooden fragments inside the crate. Poirot nodded. "These pieces once surrounded Verdini's burned panel. They were kept as evidence. Or perhaps as a relic of guilt." Calloway rubbed his forehead. "This changes everything. Motive, value, insurance. The whole case." Poirot glanced toward the lantern, now flickering as though listening. "Indeed. And consider what this means for our thief." Calloway frowned. "What does it mean?" Poirot's eyes darkened with thought. "It means the thief may not have stolen what he believed he was stealing. Or perhaps he did know. In either case, the truth of the painting's nature, its history, its shame, has been hidden for generations. And someone discovered it." He tapped the letter lightly. "Knowledge is motive, Inspector. Especially forbidden knowledge." Calloway's expression turned grave. "So the restorer, the historian, the patron, any of them could have found out." Poirot nodded. "And the curator as well. Or someone outside entirely." He looked once more into the crate. But the thief left these fragments behind. He left the lantern burning. He circled the shelves, searching. Perhaps for the original painting. Perhaps for evidence of the truth. And when he found the crate locked, he left empty-handed, but not without purpose. Poirot took a step back. "The theft of the solitary falcon is no longer merely a theft," he said. "It is a question, a challenge to the museum itself. Someone seeks not only the painting, but the story behind it." Calloway inhaled sharply. "And the feather? The hooded figure?" Poirot turned toward him, eyes sharper than the lantern flame. "Symbols, Inspector. Symbols are the chosen tools of someone who wants to expose a secret dramatically." He picked up one of the frame fragments. "And secrets buried for decades," he whispered, "do not return peacefully." The lantern goes out just then. A sudden gust of cold air swept the room, a breath from nowhere. The lantern's flame flickered violently. Poirot and Calloway both turned. A moment later, the flame died. The vault plunged into darkness. The guards cursed. Calloway fumbled for his flashlight, but Poirot remained perfectly still in the darkness. He whispered, "Someone else is here." Footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor above and then silence. Chapter 6. The corridor of borrowed faces. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the museum washed clean by sheets of rain that clung to the windows in wavering droplets. The Grand Museum of Halvern emerged from the night's turmoil quieter than usual, its staff moving with hushed urgency, their conversations clipped, their gestures brisk. The theft, the lantern in the vault, the letter revealing a century-old deception. These revelations hung heavy in the air, as though the museum itself had aged overnight. Poirot walked the main corridor with deliberate steps, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. Inspector Calloway followed, muttering under his breath as he rechecked the notes on his clipboard. "I have had quite enough of lanterns and secret letters," Calloway grumbled. "Now you insist we investigate the costume closet. What next? Tarot cards? Crystal balls?" Poirot gave him a mild look. "One must not mock what one does not yet understand, mon ami." "Don't call me," Calloway caught himself. "Don't." "Never mind." Poirot nodded politely. "As you wish, Inspector." He paused at a branching hallway that led to the museum's special events wing. Along these walls hung framed photographs from past gala smiling donors, masked performers, patrons in elaborate costumes mingling beneath chandeliers. One photograph showed a masquerade held the previous year, the inaugural gala of Renaissance shadows, a particularly extravagant fundraising affair. In the center of the photograph stood the curator, Arthur Lingley, holding a goblet aloft beside three masked figures dressed in theatrical finery. Their faces were obscured behind ornate masks adorned with black, gold, and silver feathers. Poirot studied the photograph. "Do you see, Inspector?" Calloway squinted. "What?" Rich people wearing masks? Poirot touched the glass lightly. The feathers, black, sleek, too similar to our stray feather to ignore. Calloway raised an eyebrow. You think the feather left in the gallery came from a gala mask? Perhaps, Poirot said. But let us verify. The museum stores its event costumes, yes? Calloway sighed. Yes, back here. Poirot followed him to a narrow service corridor. At the end stood a locked storage room. Calloway retrieved the key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and flicked on the light. For a moment, Poirot simply admired the room. It resembled a colorful archive of festivities past. Racks of historical gowns hung in neat rows, their silk shimmering under the fluorescent lighting. Shelves overflowed with masks, every style imaginable. Venetian half-masks, gilded visors, feathered creations inspired by peacocks, ravens, mythical beasts. Boxes of costumes sat labeled by year. Poirot stepped inside with a sense of quiet. Gravity. Let us examine the masks from the gala last year, he said. Calloway pointed to a shelf labeled Gala Renaissance Shadows, 1 year ago. Poirot selected the nearest mask, a gold satin piece with green plumes. He set it aside. Another mask presented an elaborate silver swan's wing, stiffened and lacquered. Then a crimson mask with curling horns. But then Poirot paused. He reached for a mask half hidden behind a larger one. It was heavy, matte black, edged in subtle bronze filigree. Across the right side, a fan of 7 black feathers fanned outward in a dramatic curve. Poirot lifted it with both hands. The feathers were long, sleek, glossy. He brought the mask into the light and angled it. The hue, the sheen, the curvature, everything matched the black feather left. Beneath the missing painting, Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. Inspector. Voila. Calloway leaned in. It's the same feather? Poirot nodded. Or from the same costume. Look carefully. The stitching attaching the feathers to the mask shows a loose thread, as though one feather had been tucked free. Calloway narrowed his eyes. So one of the gala masks is missing a feather, and the thief left a feather behind. Poirot gave him a small approving nod. Now you begin to appreciate the symphony. Calloway frowned. A symphony? Poirot held the mask before his face. The cloaked figure in Mr. Lingley's sketch, the feather in the gallery, the theatrical descent from the skylight, all are not random. They are elements of a performance. Calloway scratched his chin. So, someone who attended the gala used this mask during last night's theft. Or, Poirot said, someone who kept their mask afterward. He turned the mask over, examining the inside lining. It has been worn recently, he murmured. The inner fabric is warm to the touch, and the leather binding carries the faint scent of perspiration. Calloway grimaced. You can tell all that with one sniff? Poirot did not dignify the question. He held the mask aloft, examining it thoughtfully. What is more, the mask hides identity completely. Worn with a hooded cloak, our thief would appear as the shadow Lingley claimed to have seen. Calloway exhaled. So this costume closet is our new crime scene. Poirot shook his head. Not quite. The mask is not the source of the crime. It is merely another borrowed face. He replaced the mask carefully, making note of its position, precisely between 2 others, as though placed back in haste during the night or retrieved. Early this morning, Poirot turned to Calloway. Let us speak with the events coordinator. She may know who kept which masks or which guests had particular affection for dramatic feathers. Calloway scribbled a note. On it, but Poirot was not done. As he scanned the room again. A door at the back caught his eye. A small wooden door with a brass plaque reading Event Archive Staff Access. Inspector, Poirot said calmly. Might we see inside this secondary archive? Calloway shrugged. If it helps. I'll get the custodian. Moments later, a young museum assistant named Lydia Bexley arrived, clutching a ring of keys that jingled with nervous energy. Her eyes widened when she saw Poirot. Mr. Poirot, she breathed. You're here. Everyone is talking about the theft, and the vault, and the lantern. Poirot gave her a gentle smile. There is no need to be anxious, Miss Bexley. We merely wish to look inside the event archive. Lydia nodded rapidly and found the correct key. The door swung inward. Inside was a dim, narrow corridor lined with shelves containing unused props. Old signage, surplus decorations, leftover programs, and more importantly, files relating to past galas. Poirot stepped inside. His gaze moved instinctively to areas where dust was uneven, boxes recently lifted, or papers disturbed. His little gray cells hummed softly with intrigue. He inspected a box labeled Gala, Renaissance Shadows, Staff Masks. Staff masks? He asked. Lydia nodded. Yes, the event staff wore masks, two simpler ones, but coordinated with the theme. Poirot's fingers traced the edge of the box. And how many staff masks were returned? Lydia hesitated. All of them, I believe. Except one. We couldn't locate it when we packed up. But Miss Armitage said it didn't matter. Poirot turned sharply. Which staff member lost their mask? I don't know, Lydia stammered. It might not have been lost by a staff member. Guests sometimes wandered into the changing areas during the gala. It was chaotic. Poirot set the box aside and continued scanning the archive. Miss Bexley, he said gently, tell me, did Mr. Lingley ever mention concerns about forgery before the theft? Lydia's expression changed. Her nervousness deepened into something more painful. Yes, she whispered. He did. Poirot waited. Lydia took a breath. About 2 months ago, Mr. Lingley confided in me. He said he feared someone had been studying Verdini's techniques too closely. Someone with extraordinary skill. He found tiny inconsistencies, brushwork on the underlayer of the painting that he did not remember seeing before. Calloway stiffened. Inconsistencies? Are you saying the painting may have been tampered with before last night? Lydia nodded slowly. Mr. Lingley thought someone might be testing themselves, practicing, trying to imitate Verdini's hand. Poirot's gaze turned inward. An art forger. Yes, Lydia said. But a brilliant one. Mr. Lingley said he'd never seen such precision. He believed whoever it was understood Verdini at a level even he did not. Poirot exchanged a look with Calloway. And did he have a suspect? Poirot asked. Lydia hesitated. He suspected someone on the staff. Calloway threw his hands up. Well, that narrows it down to about 50 people. No, Lydia whispered. He suspected only 3. And he kept a list. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A list? Where? In his office, Lydia said. Hidden inside a copy of Verdini, A Study in Shadows. Page 73. He said he feared someone might break into his notes if he left them unguarded. Poirot drew a slow breath. Miss Bexley, he said softly, did Mr. Lingley ever express fear for his life? She shook her head. Not fear for himself, but fear for the painting. He believed the museum housed someone capable of forging Verdini's masterpiece perfectly, someone who might remove the real painting at any time and replace it without anyone noticing. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words settle into his mind like falling dust. Someone who knew the painting better than Mr. Lingley himself. He murmured. Lydia nodded. Poirot reopened his eyes, sharp with new understanding. Inspector, he said, we must retrieve the book in the curator's office immediately. And we must speak to the 3 individuals Mr. Lingley suspected. Calloway made a face like someone preparing to swallow a bitter pill. I suppose you already have theories. Poirot smiled gently. Theories, Inspector? No, not yet. Only questions. He lifted the black feathered mask again, turning it in the dim light of the archive. But I do know one thing with certainty. Calloway waited. Poirot lowered the mask. The thief did not merely steal the solitary falcon. He rehearsed the theft for weeks, perhaps months. He used masquerade, costume, forgery, and fear as tools. And perhaps... Poirot touched the mask's empty eye sockets. He learned to borrow not only faces but identities. Calloway swallowed. So our thief is someone who walks among us, wearing a mask we cannot yet see. Poirot nodded. And someone who knows precisely how to paint their lies. He turned toward the corridor. We go now to the curator's office. For in that book lies the next clue, and perhaps the name of our phantom artist. Chapter 7. The masterpiece in the mirror room. The mirror room had always been more spectacle than scholarship. It lay at the far end of the Grand Museum's west wing, a long, high-ceilinged hall originally built for a 19th century exhibition on Baroque illusions. Every surface seemed to gleam. Tall, gilt-framed mirrors climbed the walls between marble pilasters, facing each other in infinite regress. Overhead, a glass skylight admitted a soft, pearly light that was often softened further with gauze for special events. Today, there was no gauze. Today, the light fell hard and clear upon the faces of those assembled. They sat or stood in tense silence. The curator Arthur Lingley, the art restorer Sophia Linton, Professor Lionel Drake, the patron Eleanor Armitage, Lydia Bexley, the security guard Thomas Ray, the museum director, pale and rigid, 2 board members, and Inspector Calloway, who looked as though he had not slept in several days and resented every minute of it. At the center of the room, resting on a temporary easel draped with cloth, stood a rectangular object concealed under a pale linen sheet. Hercule Poirot stood beside it, his hands folded, his small figure utterly composed amid the reflected angles and multiplied space. In the mirrors, he appeared a dozen times, each reflection slightly skewed, slightly diminished by distance and distortion. It was a fitting stage, he thought, for a performance about copies and originals, about truth and deception. Calloway cleared his throat. "All right, everyone is here. You insisted on this room, Poirot. You insisted we gather them all. Now perhaps you will explain why." Poirot gave a slight nod. "Gladly, Inspector. We have reached the point in our little drama where the reflections must be separated from the reality. And there is no better place for such a task than a hall built to deceive the eye." He turned slowly, letting his gaze rest on each face in turn. "We have had a theft. A painting, the solitary falcon, removed from its frame in the East Gallery. We have had theatrics, a black feather left behind, a curator found unconscious, footsteps that are heard but not seen, a clock that stops in defiance of reason. We have had secrets, a hidden letter in the archive vault, fragments of an old frame. The revelation that the museum's treasured Verdini is in fact a copy sanctioned by its own past." Lingley shifted, his jaw tightening with remembered shame. Poirot continued, "We have spoken of cloaked figures. We have seen a sketch in which the painting appears altered, with a hooded shape where none belongs. We have found a masquerade mask missing a single black feather, just such a feather as was left beneath the empty frame." His eyes moved to Sophia Linton, who stared fixedly at the floor. "And in the underground vault," Poirot said softly, "we found evidence that someone had been searching. A lantern lit long before the power failed. Footprints circling the shelves. Marks on a locked crate. A letter that many would have preferred remained buried. And behind a false wall panel," he gestured to the draped easel, "we found this." A ripple of tension moved through the room. Calloway watched him narrowly. "You will show them?" "In good time," Poirot replied. "First, I must tell the story as it truly occurred. For a crime of this kind is not merely an act. It is a composition. And to understand the composer, one must see how each note was placed." He turned to the assembled group. "Let us begin with the painting itself. The secret of the falcon." Poirot spoke clearly, his voice carrying easily in the mirrored hall. "Many years ago, the original Verdini panel was damaged in a fire. Rather than confess the loss, the museum had a replacement made, a careful copy. Fragments of the original frame were stored away, together with a letter recording the truth. This letter we recovered yesterday in the lantern-lit vault." He nodded toward Lingley. "Mr. Lingley, you did not know this until we showed you the letter. It was a burden you did not choose, yet it fell upon you all the same." Lingley gave a strained nod. "I had no idea. I believed the painting genuine. Yet," Poirot went on, "you began to notice something in the months before the theft. Tiny inconsistencies in the brushwork. Angelic, but suspect. You confided in Miss Bexley that you believed someone was studying Verdini's technique very closely, that someone was testing themselves on the painting, on its underlayers, on its restoration history. Lydia looked stricken but nodded. He was very troubled by it. Someone, in other words, Poirot said, who had the skill to copy a Renaissance painter so perfectly that even the curator required magnification to notice the difference. Someone with unrestricted access to the painting, to the conservation reports, to the pigmented retouching on the varnish. He paused. There is only one such person in this building. His gaze settled on Sophia Linton. She did not look up. The false theft, Poirot resumed, his tone even. When the painting vanished, it appeared to be a daring theft. The skylight, the frayed rope, the disturbed dust. The feather left as a calling card. The curator attacked. The cameras in the East Corridor freezing at precisely 30 minutes past 3. The security room clock stopping at that same moment. A thief who enters unseen, whose steps are heard, but whose face is never captured. It had all the flavor of an audacious burglary from outside. Calloway muttered, "It still might be." "No, Inspector," Poirot said gently. "It could not. The events in the vault tell us otherwise." He turned to the others. Yesterday evening, during the power outage, an old museum lantern was discovered burning in the archive vault. Its fuel level and burn pattern told us it had been lit long before the outage. Footprints led us in a wide circle around the shelves to a locked crate. Whoever had been there searched, found something or failed to find it, and then left. When I investigated the vault more closely afterward, I looked not only at the crate and the letter, but at the walls themselves. He nodded toward Calloway. "You remember, Inspector?" Calloway sighed. "I remember that you spent 20 minutes staring at bricks." Poirot smiled slightly. "Yes, but bricks, like people, have habits. They age, they gather dust. They reveal their secrets to those who pay attention. On one section of wall, the dust line was wrong. The bricks were cleaner, the mortar newer. A rectangle of slightly different texture. He turned back to the group. I tapped. The sound was different. Hollow, a false partition. Behind it, concealed for no more than a few months, we found a narrow cavity. And inside that cavity, wrapped in conservation cloth, carefully padded, we found the painting that everyone believed was gone." He inclined his head toward the easel. The solitary falcon was never smuggled out of the museum. It never flew farther than the space behind that wall. The theft was not an act of escape. It was an act of substitution. Sophia's hands tightened around the arms of her chair. 3. The restorer's plan. Poirot looked at her now without disguise. "Miss Linton," he said quietly, "you are a brilliant conservator. Your dedication to preservation is genuine. Your respect for Verdini is real. It is precisely because of that skill and respect that the temptation arose." Sophia did not answer. Poirot went on. "You alone had reason to resent the state of the painting. You believed, and rightly, from a conservation standpoint, that it was deteriorating under the strain of display. You urged its removal. You were refused. You watched as the museum insisted on using it as a glamorous centerpiece, regardless of the risk." Sophia's voice, when it came, was brittle. "Someone had to care what happened to it." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "And someone did. You. But concern alone does not remove a painting from its frame at midnight in a simulated burglary. For that, we must add something else. Opportunity, knowledge, and a very particular kind of pride." He paced slowly, his reflection sliding in the long mirrors like a procession of smaller men. "You have been working on a private project for some time. A replica. At first, perhaps, it was a study to understand Verdini's hand more intimately, to feel the movement of her brush. But gradually, the replica became more than a study. It became a second falcon, identical in dimension, perfectly matched in pigment and texture, aged deliberately with crackler imitations and minute abrasions. A triumph of technique." Sophia closed her eyes. Lydia stared at her, horror dawning. "You told no one," Poirot said. "You knew very well that forging a work in a museum's care, even for intellectual curiosity, would be considered unforgivable. And yet, the more perfect your replica became, the more glaring the museum's compromise appeared. The original was already a copy, its history incomplete, its truth concealed. You told yourself you were not forging, merely correcting. You were making the painting as it should have been. Sophia's shoulders shook once. Almost imperceptibly, Poirot softened his tone. You convinced yourself that the museum did not deserve the painting it had betrayed a century ago. That only you truly understood Verdini's vision. So you devised a plan. You would swap your replica for the painting in the gallery. Then, once the exchange was complete and no one suspected, you would dispose of the old panel and its awkward secrets. The museum would never know. The world would admire your conservation. And you, Miss Lind, would have created what even Verdini could not. A painting that did not decay, that obeyed your will. Calloway's voice was low. You intended to destroy the original? Even if it was already a copy, it was still part of history. Sophia finally spoke, her voice hoarse. You call it a copy. I call it a lie on wood. It was born of deceit. The museum chose vanity over honesty, and then made me its caretaker. I tried to protect it, but I could not respect it. Poirot regarded her steadily. You could not respect what others had done, but you did not hesitate to deceive in your turn. She flinched. IV. The cloak, the feather, and the fall. Poirot turned to the others. The masquerade mask with the black feathers came from last year's gala. It was a staff mask, part of the event wardrobe. When we examined the inside lining, we found traces of a particular fixative one used regularly in the conservation studio. Only your gloves, Miss Linden, bore the same residue. Sophia's head jerked up. You searched my gloves? Yes, Poirot said simply. And I compared your notebook sketches to the curator's altered drawing. The same hand, the same pressure, the same habit of shading with short diagonal strokes before smoothing with the finger. Lingley turned to her sharply. You drew the cloaked figure into my sketchbook? Sophia swallowed. You were already suspicious, Arthur. You saw things in the painting. You spoke of shadows in the background. I thought if you doubted yourself, if you questioned your own perception, you might hesitate to intervene. I never meant... Her words faltered. You never meant for him to be struck on the head, Poirot finished for her. No, that part was not in your plan. You intended a quiet switch, not a dramatic collapse beneath an empty frame. The stage burglary came later, when your secret began to slip from your control. Sophia's eyes glistened. I came into the gallery that night before Arthur. I used the skylight, the rope, the mask. I had measured everything. I believed the cameras could not see me. I removed the painting, replaced it temporarily with nothing at all while I carefully wrapped it. It was meant to be a brief interval before I installed the replica. And then? Poirot asked, and then Arthur arrived. Her voice shook. He was not supposed to be there. He startled me. I panicked. I still had the mask. I still had the cloak. I moved toward him, trying to shield the painting. He stumbled. The feather caught his face. He slipped on his own dropped torch and struck his head on the floor. I dropped the feather. I did not push him. I swear to you, I did not. Lingley looked stunned, replaying the moment in his mind. Poirot nodded. I believe you. Your panic was genuine. But by then, the scene looked very much like an assault. A curator unconscious. A vanished painting. A feather from a black mask. You fled by the route you had planned up through the skylight, along the corridor beneath the second skylight, leaving minute traces of dust disturbance and rope fray in your wake. You retreated to the conservation studio and hid the painting temporarily. But events were already moving beyond you. The alarm was raised. The investigation began. You could not return to complete the exchange. Sophia whispered, everything was ruined. Not everything, Poirot said quietly. You still had the painting, and you still had your pride. But now there were complications you had not expected. The power outage, the letter in the vault, the lantern. He took a breath. You went to the archive vault before the outage, lit the lantern to work secretly, and searched for any record of the painting's origin that might contradict your version of events. You found the crate, but not the key. You saw the old frame fragments but could not reach the letter. You left the lantern, intending to return. But the storm intervened. The power failed. Others noticed the lantern before you did. Once again, your attempt to control the narrative slipped away. Sophia's composure frayed. I never meant the letter to come out. I thought if the museum's deception was exposed, your attention would turn to the board, to past directors. You would not look so closely at me. And yet, Poirot said, it was the letter that gave me one of the final pieces of the puzzle. It told me exactly how much had been at stake for you. Not merely the integrity of a single painting, but the entire foundation of the museum's claim to greatness. He turned to the others. After discovering the false wall, I understood that the theft had been inward, not outward. Someone was trying to alter the museum's internal reality, not merely to steal property. That pointed me back to those whose world is the museum itself. His eyes returned to Sophia, and of those people, only one possessed the skill to create a mirror image of Verdini's work that could stand in the same hall, under the same light, and deceive not only the public but the experts. The painting revealed. Poirot stepped to the easel. Now, if you please, we will let the painting speak for itself. With a smooth motion, he pulled away the linen cloth. Gasps broke out. There it was, the solitary falcon, the stone archway, rendered in muted ochres and grays. The solitary bird, fierce and composed, perched upon its narrow ledge. The subtle interplay of light and darkness on the carved stone. It was as though no theft had occurred. The painting seemed unchanged, untouched. But Poirot looked not at the painting alone. He watched the faces, reflected around it. Lingley stared at it with a mixture of relief and dread. Drake leaned forward, pupils dilated with hungry interest. Eleanor Armitage closed her eyes briefly, as though in prayer. Sophia Linton did not move at all. Poirot turned toward her. You see it, do you not? He asked, softly. For the first time, a tear slid down her cheek. Yes, she whispered. I see it. Calloway frowned. See what? It looks exactly the same to me. It would, Poirot said. To most eyes, the differences are invisible. But they exist. On the back of the panel, beneath the lining, there are small notations. Very faint. In pencil. One hand belongs to a restorer from decades past. The other hand, more recent, belongs to Miss Linton. And beneath the most recent notation, hidden under a patch of adhesive and sealing cloth, there is the beginning of a new signature. Just the curve of an initial, nothing more. But enough. He looked at Sophia. You cannot resist it, could you? However discreetly, you wished your authorship to exist somewhere inside the work. To leave a sign that you, too, had a hand in the so-called Verdini. Sophia's voice was scarcely audible. I told myself it was for future conservators, so they would know what had been done. But yes, I wanted to be sure someone would know. Poirot inclined his head. That desire to be known is not in itself a crime, but when joined with deception, it becomes dangerous. He turned to Calloway. Inspector, technicians also confirmed what Miss Bexley and Mr. Lingley suspected. Microscopic examination of the lower paint layers shows two distinct modern interventions. One is a standard conservation retouching from some years ago. The other is a more extensive integration, recent, subtle, and nearly indistinguishable from the original brushwork. Calloway exhaled. Done by her. Yes, Poirot said. Miss Linton had already begun the swap in spirit, long before the night she removed the painting from its frame. She had been rehearsing on the actual object, then on the replica, then back again. The boundary between them blurred in her mind. When she finally acted, it was not merely theft. It was an attempt to redraw reality. He gestured to the mirrors lining the hall. In this room, reflections distort, multiply, and confuse what we see. The real object is surrounded by copies. It is an apt metaphor for what you attempted, Miss Lennon. To place your painting where Verdini should have been, and to let the world live forever in that reflection. He let the silence linger. Then he spoke more gently. You did not destroy the painting. That step you had not yet taken. The original, whatever its compromised history, still exists. And for that, at least, you may be grateful. There are some lines that once crossed cannot be recrossed. Sophia's voice trembled. It was only a matter of time. The wood is unstable, the varnish brittle. The painting would have failed. I thought, if it must be lost, let it be lost on my terms, with my hand ready to replace it. And you would have become, Poirot said, both executioner and creator, judge and jury. An entire court of art contained in one person. She did not deny it. Vi. The final accusation, Inspector Calloway stepped forward. His face set. Sophia Lynn, he said, I must formally caution you that anything you say can be used against you. You are under suspicion for the theft of the solitary falcon, for tampering with museum property, and for obstructing an investigation. It may also be necessary to consider charges relating to endangering the curator's safety. Sophia's shoulders sagged. I never meant to hurt Arthur. I thought he would. Never mind what I thought. Lingley stared at her, grief and anger battling in his eyes. You could have told me, he said quietly, about the painting state, about your fears, even about your skill. We might have fought the board together. We might have petitioned to withdraw the painting honestly. Sophia let out a hollow laugh. Honestly? In this place? The same institution that buried a letter in a crate and hoped it would never be read. Lingley flinched. That's enough, Calloway said sharply. You'll have time to make speeches later. Sophia rose to her feet slowly. Her reflection in the nearest mirror rose with her thinner, smaller, stretched by the glass. For a moment, it seemed as though there were two of her, the woman the museum knew and the woman she had tried to become. She looked at Poirot. Was it really so obvious? She asked. Poirot considered his answer. No, he said honestly. It was not obvious. You were precise. You understood the systems. You arranged symbols that could have led us in many directions, toward phantom thieves from outside, toward donors, historians, administrators. You used the mask and the feather to suggest a stranger. You added the cloaked figure to Mr. Lingley's sketch to discredit his stability. You tried to keep all eyes fixed on the theater of the East Gallery while you worked in the quiet of the vault. He paused, but in the end, you could not escape one simple truth. Of all the people in this building, only one person would have felt the theft as a personal act of justice, rather than as an attack. Only one saw the painting not as a treasure to be guarded, but as a lie to be corrected. Only one loved the image enough to want to recreate it entirely with their own hand. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. I did love it, she whispered. Poirot's voice softened. I know. Calloway stepped closer. You will come with us now, Miss Linton. She did not resist as the inspector led her from the mirror room. The reflections multiplied their movement. Dozens of Sophias walking away, disappearing one by one as she passed out of sight. Poirot remained standing beside the unveiled painting. Silence settled again over the hall. Lingley approached slowly. Is it over then? He asked. Poirot shook his head. Not entirely. The painting is recovered? Yes. The attempted swap is exposed. But there remains one last matter, the matter of the museum's own reflection. Its history. Its honesty. That is not my case. It is yours. He looked at the director and the board members. You must decide whether you will continue to live with comfortable illusions, or whether you will trust the public with the truth. Verdini's panel, the copy, the fragments, all of it. Believe me when I say, secrets are like cracks in varnish. They spread. Eleanor Armitage, who had been quiet until now, spoke softly. And if the donors do not like the truth? Poirot turned to her. Then they must decide whether they wish to support art or reputation. The two are not always the same. He covered the painting once more with the linen cloth. In any case, he added, the law will take its course with Miss Linton, but the moral restoration that belongs to you. He glanced around at the mirrored walls one last time. In this room, he said, we have seen how easily appearances can multiply and distort. But in the end, there is only one painting, one crime, one truth. He gave a small, precise bow, and Hercule Poirot is satisfied that he has found it. Yet even as he spoke, a faint unease lingered at the edges of his mind. There was still one more conversation to be had, one more detail to settle, one more quiet, private revelation. The case publicly? was concluded, but in the privacy of his thoughts, Poirot knew that the final brushstroke, the true completion, lay ahead. That would come with the dawn, in a smaller room, before a smaller audience. And when it did, the falcon would at last be free of all its shadows. Chapter 8. The last stroke of the painter's hand dawn crept slowly over the Grand Museum of Halvern, its pale light threading through the skylights like thin strokes of diluted gold. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the air washed clean and carrying a faint scent of rain-soaked stone. For the first time in days, the museum felt still, not tense, not fearful, but suspended in that delicate intervening breath before a new day fully arrives. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the East Gallery. The empty frame no longer hung hollow on the wall. The solitary falcon, wrapped in protective cloth after its recovery, rested on a padded table beside the conservation desk. Soon, overseen by careful hands other than those compromised by pride, the painting would be remounted in its restored place. For now, it lay still and silent, a patient awaiting treatment. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and allowed the quiet to settle over him. His little gray cells, now satisfied with the solution of the case, no longer rang with tension. Instead, they hummed with contemplation. There were footsteps behind him. Arthur Lingley entered the gallery, moving slowly as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace of the morning. His bruised temple was bandaged, and fatigue clung to him like a second shadow. But his face held something else as well relief. He approached Poirot with a kind of solemn gratitude. "You stayed," Lingley said quietly. Poirot gave a slight bow of the head. "I wish to see the room once more in its tranquility, and to speak with you before the museum awakens." Lingley nodded, his gaze turning to the draped painting. "It feels strange, Poirot, as though I have lived through a dream or a nightmare, and now I do not quite recognize the gallery I have curated for years." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but that is the nature of revelation, is it not? It leaves the world unchanged and yet entirely altered. The walls remain the same, the frames the same, but your understanding shifts, and so the room becomes new." Lingley breathed deeply. "I do not know how to thank you. Without you, the museum would have lost far more than a painting." Poirot's mustache twitched in modest amusement. "One is what one can, monsieur. But there is one matter I should like to discuss before the day begins." Lingley looked puzzled. "Is something unresolved?" "Not unresolved," Poirot assured him. "Simply unfinished. A brushstroke not yet examined." He walked to the small side table where the sketchbook still lay. Open to the page that had once so haunted Lingley, the sketch of the solitary falcon with the cloaked figure behind the arch. Lingley swallowed. "I would rather forget that drawing." Poirot tapped the page gently. "And yet it remains important. For this, monsieur, is where our story began to bend away from truth and toward the line painted by another's hand." Lingley drew closer, staring down at the ghostly figure. "I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I had added something without remembering, or that something was wrong with the painting itself." Poirot shook his head. "No, the alteration was made by Miss Sophia Linton, and it was not merely to manipulate your perception. It was to leave her signature." Lingley blinked. "Her signature? But she signed nothing." Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, but she did. Miss Linton is not only a restorer, she is an artist. And artists, even when they strive for anonymity, cannot resist leaving their mark, especially those who create forgeries." Lingley stiffened slightly. "She forged multiple works?" "In years past, yes," Poirot said softly, quietly, discreetly. "A frame repaired too expertly, an old panel retouched too lovingly. Not criminally, not for profit, at least, but for the satisfaction of mastering another's style. Her calling card was always the same, a hooded, faceless figure, a shape hidden in the shadows of her forgeries, a secret tribute to her own role as creator of replicas." Lingley stared at the drawing again. "And she put it here? In my sketchbook?" "To steady her nerves, perhaps," Poirot said. "To feel that familiar pattern beneath her fingers, or to plant doubt in your mind. But it is unmistakably her mark. The brushstroke technique she used in oils, she reproduced here in graphite. I recognized it the moment I compared the altered sketch to her notes in the conservation studio. Lingley sank into a nearby chair. So she could never stop herself, not fully. No, Poirot replied gently. She was too gifted, too proud, too enchanted by the challenge of perfect replication. The museum, with its concealed copy and long-buried secret, was the ideal stage for her obsession. He closed the sketchbook. The hooded figure, Poirot continued, was never a ghost, never a threat from beyond the painting. It was the artist signing her invisible name. Lingley exhaled shakily. I should have seen it. I should have questioned the changes sooner. Poirot shook his head firmly. Your guilt is misplaced, monsieur. Miss Linden deceived herself before she deceived anyone else. Her love for the painting became a hunger one that consumed reason. But you, Arthur Lingley, were the person she least wished to harm. Lingley looked up. Then why did she? She did not intend to strike you, Poirot interrupted softly. She intended only to shield her secret. Your arrival was unexpected. Panic, not malice, caused your injury. Silence fell again. The first full rays of sunrise entered through the skylight, filling the gallery with warm, clear light. It touched the gilded frame on the wall still, empty and cast a bright reflection along the polished floor. Poirot stepped toward the window and watched. The light settled over the space. You will see, he murmured, that the shadows retreat in the morning. They never vanish entirely, no, but they lose their hold. They become smaller, less imposing. The danger lies not in the shadows themselves, but in allowing them to grow unchecked. Lingley followed, standing beside him. And now? He asked quietly. What happens to the painting? Poirot turned slightly. It will be carefully remounted. This time, with proper oversight and proper humility. The museum will confront its past. The truth will be told openly, not buried in locked crates. Lingley nodded. And Sophia? Poirot's expression grew solemn. She will face justice, but not as a monster. As a woman whose gift outgrew her conscience. It is a tragedy, yes, but one born of talent misdirected. Lingley sighed. Thank you, Poirot, for everything, for restoring order, for restoring truth. Poirot inclined his head. Truth, monsieur, is the finest varnish. It clarifies all beneath it. A small procession approached conservation staff carrying the recovered painting. Still wrapped, but now accompanied by fresh tools for cleaning, stabilization, and gentle reinstallation. They murmured respectfully as they entered the gallery. Poirot stepped aside, allowing them to begin their work. The linen cloth was lifted. The solitary falcon emerged into the full morning light. Its colors seemed warmer now, its shadows softer. The archway was empty, as it had always been. No cloaked figure lurked behind the stone. No hidden malice. Only the painter's quiet mastery, unmarred by false strokes or secret signatures. Lingley inhaled sharply. A us sound that was both grief and gratitude. Poirot watched the scene with a small, knowing smile. The masterpiece, Poirot said softly, has returned to its rightful place. But more importantly, monsieur, so have you. Lingley looked at him, confusion flickering. You doubted yourself, Poirot explained. Your eye, your memory, your judgment. But you are not the curator who failed. You are the curator who fought to understand. And now, if I may say so, you are wiser than before. Lingley's expression softened. Then perhaps the shadow served some purpose after all. Poirot's mustache twitched. Indeed, without shadows, how would we appreciate the light? He checked his pocket watch, the hands now moving faithfully, unlike the compromised clock of the security room. It is time for me to go, he said. Lingley's voice warmed. The museum will never forget what you have done. Poirot offered a modest shrug. It is enough that the truth is restored. He turned, prepared to take his leave, but before he reached the doorway, he paused and spoke once more softly, almost to himself. The last stroke of the painter's hand, he murmured, is not the one placed on canvas. It is the one placed on conscience. And with that, Hercule Poirot stepped out into the brightening corridors of the Grand Museum. His work finished, the shadows dispersed, and the truth, at last, perfectly framed.